WNST, Tash real fast. I am wearing the official Chicken Palooza shirt on. My wife is threatening to teach me the chicken dance. Chicken Palooza ends on the 31st. Want to remind everybody to get out there. You get chicken for a year. All proceeds benefiting the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. Excuse me, a portion of the proceeds, not all. But you know what I'm saying. Buy some chicken, get some Western fries. This guy has done that. Luke Jones is here to preview all things Miami. Luke, I might just go to the Royal Farms, which is a block and a half from where I live, pick up some fried chicken here. And the problem with fried chicken is I can't tweet in the middle of the games because my fingers get a little messy. But I don't know how much I'm going to be tweeting after halftime. And look, this is fake football, but this is as close as we're going to get, I guess, as the Ravens go down to Miami with lots of questions about the offensive line. And quite frankly, if they move the ball, protect Flacco, can move the ball on the ground, that would really be something if they're going to do this without Stanley and Yonda, because Lord knows they had a hard time doing that last year.
Yeah, I mean, you would think this would be the final tune-up for the starters, and it typically is, but because of where they stand on the offensive line, Ronnie Stanley, who we know had the mild knee sprain on Monday night, all indications are that this isn't something that's going to keep him out for the start of the season, but as far as Saturday night, well, he didn't practice to begin the week. He left the game on Monday night, so you would think he is very much a question mark, if not flat-out doubtful, to play against the Dolphins. We don't know if Marshall Yonda is going to play. It hasn't been determined, at least publicly, whether he would get some preseason action, which I think was a fair question to wonder because he hasn't played since week 2 last year. You know, would he feel inclined to want to at least get that clock going a little bit?
Well, go play a series, 6, 8, 10 plays, whatever it is, right?
Maybe. I mean, we don't know. I mean, he might be held out altogether, but you also have, and this was kind of quietly an observation that I made on Monday night, not that I necessarily thought something was wrong with him, but James Hurst quietly left the game after Ronnie Stanley, but before Matt Skura and Alex Lewis, which, the timing of that, you're figuring, okay, he is a little bit more of a veteran player, even if we don't know if he's going to start at right tackle or wherever he's going to wind up in that hierarchy, but he didn't practice on Wednesday. So you're looking at potentially, and we don't know this yet, and I'm not sure we're going to get much clarity from John Harbaugh before the week's out and we go into the weekend, but we don't know. The Ravens could potentially be without at least 3 of their top 6, if not 3 of their starters week 1. Under that scenario, do you really want to risk exposing Joe Flacco to a Miami front if Greg Sinat's playing left tackle and you have Jermaine Illuminor, let's say, playing left guard? I don't know. Certainly you want to see him get some more reps, and it's not as though Joe has played extensively in the 2 preseason games in which he's played, but it's less than ideal, and it's not something that's a panic for the start of the season per se, but you sure don't want to be exposing your starting quarterback who is healthy, who's had a good training camp, has looked solid to good in both preseason performances. It's an uncomfortable position to be in. You want to have a tune-up, there's no question, and you'd like to see him play a quarter, maybe into the second quarter like he did against Indianapolis, but boy, if you're missing 3 potential starters on your offensive line on Saturday night, I'm just not sure the juice is worth the squeeze there. So we'll see how it plays out. Again, I don't expect John Harbaugh to broadcast his intentions there, but wouldn't be shocked if you see Flacco in a little more of a truncated, a little more abbreviated appearance, if not held out entirely, if they're missing 3 members of their offensive line, and can't say that I would blame the Ravens if it plays out that way.
Well, and we want to see the offense be crisp, and I think everybody's felt good about things. There's only one thing you could really feel bad about, if something happened at number 5, or if Yonda went out there and rolled something up, or if Alex Lewis rolls something up, or if Crabtree pulls a hammy, or, on and on and on and on and on and on of all the awful crap, quite frankly, that could happen. And, let's be honest, bro. The Jimmy Smith thing is not on the field crap. it's worse than off the field crap, right? For whatever this is going to be in the aftermath of Ray Rice. But then, as you've pointed out, and I thought definitely at WNST.net and some of your writing in the wake of the Jimmy Smith situation, which is this has been a really bad team without Jimmy Smith. But Jimmy Smith hasn't been in there. A couple years ago, I remember against the Jets and the Giants up at you and I made those trips up to the Meadowlands, up to MetLife. They lost both of those games late because they couldn't stop a nosebleed in the fourth quarter. The ball kept going over their head, and they had a special wide receiver, and we didn't. And that was pre-Humphrey, to some degree. And then there's, without Yonda, without Stanley, last year, without Brandon Williams in the middle over in London and not being able to – I mean, these guys that make a lot of money, when Ozzie spends that kind of money and those guys get on the field, they're valuable commodities when they play well. Not Perryman or Elam or whatever, but you count on Justin Tucker being that kind of kicker. You count on we're still counting on Terrell Suggs, quite frankly. But when those guys are missing, boy, oh boy, this – team has had a hard time winning with a gimpy Flacco, a missing Yonda, a banged-up Brandon Williams, a banged-up Ronnie Stanley, a fat Terrell Suggs when he had that issue. Anytime things are a little off-kilter, and this is a week where things are a little off-kilter for them, right? No Yonda, Stanley, Suggs will play a minute or two, probably less than he did last week. Things will look a little different than like full go. And as we've said all along, and this is no shock in the modern era, no one's full go till September 9. I mean, period, right? Like, no one is really out there going 1-against-1 into the first series of the third quarter anymore and doing it with any relative sense of health in this league anymore.
Yeah, and to the point that you made just a few moments ago, this is the case for any team. I mean, you can point to the Philadelphia Eagles and what they did. That's not a blueprint. That's an anomaly. And a credit to the Eagles and that organization for the depth that they were able to have. And, why did they have it? Because they had a quarterback on a rookie contract, because you have the flexibility with your salary cap to have more depth around your roster. But the point that you that brought up about Jimmy Smith, I'm not sure how much of that we're really going to see come to fruition on Saturday. I don't know if Jimmy Smith will play on Saturday, quite frankly. The first practice, we didn't even hear from John Harbaugh, let alone anyone else in the organization to kind of dive into the off-field matters. We did hear from Wink Martindale talking about it and talking about their depth at corner, but it's clear whenever you have your guys that are on a second contract, or in the case of Terrell Suggs, who's on a third, maybe going on to a fourth contract after this year if he wants to keep playing. I mean, that's rare, but those guys that are on that second contract that you've committed deep financial, deep resources to, if you don't have them on the field, you can talk all you want about next man up. And what do I always say? Next man up sounds great until you get to a point where it's nothing more than a T-shirt slogan because you're so banged up at certain positions.
Well, dude, let's be honest, man. You blow a Matt Elam pick in the 20s, or you blow a Rashad pick. That sucks. It's no fun. It's bad. It's way, way worse when you give a player $22 million and he can't get on the field, right?
No doubt.
Like, it's a whole different level of hurt, because that's an is, not a might be. And this franchise, knock on wood, my head, whatever, for the most part, has invested wisely in is guys, not was or used to be's or overpaying for somebody who used to do something. And most of those guys, most of the time, have been able to get to post. That's why John Harbaugh and Brian Billick have been the only coaches we've known here for 20 years, right? Like, literally, that's a big part of that. But there have been lots of years like last year where those pieces have fallen apart, and a 7-9 or an 8-8 or 9-7 or whatever that is, never anything tremendously awful. But part of that is they've been pretty good about investing that money, and when that money's been on the field, they've been pretty good because of it. But it is such a delicate Humpty Dumpty on the wall kind of balance of all of the guys with the money and the depth, and who you can absorb a loss from and who you can't. And to your point, nobody can absorb the quarterback except for the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles. That's it, right? Literally.
Right. I mean, that's just the reality. And is it a lesson to maybe invest a little bit more on the backup quarterback? Maybe. But I think it's more the exception and not some new trend that we're going to start seeing. But You mentioned some of those contracts or when you blow a draft pick. It has a trickle-down effect that you feel for years. I mean, look at way back when Eugene Monroe signed a deal with the Ravens early before the 2014 season. If that had played out the way it was supposed to, Eugene Monroe would still be their left tackle, and then the Ravens would have used the 6th overall pick 2 years ago on who knows what. So
traded up for Jalen Ramsey or something, right?
Right.
Crazy.
Look at the safety position. I mean, they have Eric Weddle, and they put a big contract on the table for Tony Jefferson, and the latter hasn't necessarily panned out to this point, or let's say the jury's still out big time. But in both of those cases, why did they have to do that? Because Matt Elam was a bust, because Terrence Brooks, who was a third-round pick, didn't stick. So you always have that trickle-down effect. But bringing it back to Jimmy Smith, you can look at analytics, you can look at more traditional statistics, or you can even look at anecdotal evidence. The Ravens have been an inferior defense when Jimmy Smith has not been on the field. They've had times where they've played without some of their other big guys for a period of time, and they've been able to endure for a game or two here or there. But the numbers don't lie. The history doesn't lie. When Jimmy Smith's not out there, their pass defense is inferior, and there's a noticeable drop-off there. Now, I will point this out. The Ravens last year, even with the late collapses against Pittsburgh and against Cincinnati, they went 4-2 without Jimmy Smith in the 6 games where he missed significant time. And that's counting, I guess it was the Oakland game he only played sparingly, and the Detroit game he got hurt, obviously, in the first half. They went 4-2. The year before, when he missed parts of 7 games, they went 2-5. So they did make some improvement. Marlon Humphrey factors in there big time. They're hoping that a 32-year-old Brandon Carr can fight off Father Time at least one more year. They have Tavon Young back. I think they are really high on Maurice Kennedy and Anthony Averett, the rookie 4th-rounder, who I thought played a heck of a game on Monday night. So I think there's more depth there. We're not talking about Asa Jackson or Shockey Brown or Dominique Franks or Danny Gore or Rashawn Melvin. I just rattled off 5 guys that they cycled through in that 2014 season when they lost Jimmy Smith, which I think in retrospect, kind of amazing the Ravens went as far as they did that year.
Well, when you talk about cycling in, when those guys don't come back, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. And, there were some fringe guys, like to your point, the Asa Jacksons and the Shockey Browns, who were thought of on fringe, on rosters, on the when they left and came back and again, and it just never happened for those kids, right? I mean, and I guess that's where we are with the Hills and the Tavon Youngs, right?
Yeah, and it just becomes. Not everyone makes it. We know that. No one drafts 100%. You're not going to bat anywhere close to 1,000. You're hoping that you hit on your early picks, and they at least become solid starting players. You'd love if someone blossoms into a Pro Bowler, but you know that that's not always going to happen. And this is where the Ravens, even with some of their recent shortcomings with some of those early picks, they've done really well for themselves on day 3. But where they stand right now, it's clear that they've invested more in cornerback depth the last couple years, and they're going to have to tap into that. The good thing about the Jimmy Smith suspension from a football standpoint, as opposed to the injuries that he's had here in recent years, is this is the beginning of the season where if your defense does get off to a rocky start and you can't contain A.J. Green in Week 2, or you can't contain Antonio Brown in Week 4, 2 road games, 2 division road games, which isn't ideal in the month of September when you're not playing with when you're without your best corner, but you do have time to recover. But again, it's great to talk about your depth. It's a different thing when you have to tap into that depth, because everyone talks glowingly about their depth until you find out about some of these guys, and you find out maybe they're not cut out to be quite as good as you hope. So there's definitely going to be some drop-off. You don't pay Jimmy Smith what you pay him to have no drop-off. In the same way that I laughed when people would try to say next man up when they lost Marshall Yonda last year, or when they lost Terrell Suggs at the beginning of 2015. You just don't replace players like that. But with the players that they have, headlined by Marlon Humphrey, who I think looks the part of a future number one corner, had a really strong rookie year, and profiles in a very similar way to Jimmy Smith from a skill set standpoint. You're hoping that he blossoms, and that's not just for this year, but for the big picture. Jimmy Smith is scheduled to make a lot of money next year, and with the off-field issues now, coupled with the injury history, I would say there's a very good chance this is going to be Jimmy Smith's final year with the Baltimore Ravens, but that decision becomes far easier if Humphrey can start to really look like a number one corner. And if that happens, then I think the Ravens have a much better chance of enduring without Smith early in the season, and then they get him back, and hopefully he stays healthy, and hopefully there's nothing else from an off-field standpoint that really makes an ugly situation even worse. And if that happens, then the Ravens should be in good position to be in position to make the playoffs for the first time since 2014. But again, we talk so much about how swimmingly this preseason has gone, this training camp has gone, and avoiding injuries.
Here comes the whitewater.
Yeah, and it's one of those that impacts you on the field and off. So again, we spent some time earlier in the week talking about the ugliness of this off the field and not wanting to diminish that, but very clear there's fallout in that regard. And from the lens, from a football lens, certainly some challenges the Ravens are going to have to navigate through here early in 2018.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him out on Twitter at Baltimore Luke, as well as all of our Twitter work at WNST, and of course, putting together the morning newspaper. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness at PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Just sign up. Get to a Planet Fitness near you. There's one right around the corner, always judgment-free, as we've sent the kids back to school. Also brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Jockey Club and Laurel. The Maryland Million will be on October 20th. I'll be 50 years old by then, but get on down there. That's Saturday in October. And, of course, racing alive and well on the front of WNST.net, as well as in our morning newspaper. Just click on the tab. You get the entries. My man Stan Salter is standing by down at Laurel to lead you around as well. Beautiful new sports bar down there. If you haven't been to Laurel lately, make sure you're checking that out. Also, Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I am wearing my official Chicken Palooza shirt. I want to make sure I get the whole thing online here. That's the full chicken, and that's Chicken Palooza. That's going on through the 31st. That's chicken for a year. You win, you sign up online. Get your ROFO rewards card. That's on the back of my coffee cup here, but also you can get it on your app. So when you're pumping your gas, use the card. The Western fries, the Chicken Palooza shirt, all comes with the game. Chicken Palooza ends next week. I'll be doing the chicken dance and drinking more Royal Farms. I'm going to get some chicken this weekend for the game. We are previewing the game. Luke and I are refraining from Miami. We did enough of fake baseball last summer, right down there for the All-Star game. We don't need to do fake football here. I wanted to sort of circle back on the Jimmy Smith, not on the suspension, not on all the off-the-field stuff, but my wife and I were making plans for the fall, right? Because here comes football season. We're going to do some live shows with Carl Delmont and our friends at Fremont Mortgage. We're going to swap for the Bone Marrow Registry and for There Goes My Hero. So we're doing all this stuff. Got a lot of moving parts and nights and some concerts and fun stuff. I want to get my wife to Bruno Mars. And the Steelers thing comes up, right? So the Bengals game is this crazy Thursday, play bang-bang. We're the first team to either be 2-0 or 1-1 or 0-2 or whatever it's going to be. And then they're going to go to Pittsburgh and play this Sunday night game without Jimmy Smith. They're going to play against Green without Jimmy Smith. They're going to play against the Broncos without Jimmy Smith. And I wonder when that game ends, and I thought about this because you and I, you don't know this yet. We have a hotel, lovely. We're going to spend about 3 hours in after the game. We get back at 2 in the morning. We've got a 6 o'clock flight back on Monday morning. But I'm wondering when we're getting out of bed and wiping the sleep out of our eyes after doing the morning show late into the night, when you start to chunk the season the way Billick always says, quarters, how are we going to do in this quarter, this quarter, this quarter? Boy, the Jimmy Smith thing is worrisome. The offensive line thing not being on the field, worrisome. The Stanley thing, a little worrisome. I'm not as worried as I've been in the past because I think we've had a lot of other concerns in the past. But they start to creep up, and the notion of playing without Jimmy Smith and what their record will be when they have to go out to Cleveland and kick off my 50th birthday month and play 3 out of 4 games on the road, right? How's that going to go? And they got to get to the turn at 2-2 or 3-1. I'm bullish on them, but I know how it goes when the ball goes over Jimmy Smith's head in the fourth quarter, somewhere deep into the night in Pittsburgh or deep into the night in Cincinnati on a Thursday night when everybody's dog-ass tired, nobody's any good to start with.
Well, I think you kind of look back at the last few years. Now, very early in the season, the Ravens have done well. If you look at the month of September, I mean, they started 2-0 last year before they went to London, and enough said. We don't need to rehash that dumpster fire of a football game. The year before that, remember, the Ravens started 3-0 and looked like things were going to be going really well. And where they've really fallen into the trap has been October the last couple of years, and I don't know if there's any pattern there whatsoever as much as just health and who you're playing at the time. But I look at this year's schedule, and the last couple of years, the Ravens have had a bye right around week 9, week 10. And the general trend of this post-Super Bowl 47 era where the Ravens have been, for the most part, 2015 aside, they've always been in the hunt, but they just haven't been quite good enough. They tend to get to the bye week, and they're what, 4-5? They're 3-4. They're just hovering around 500, or even worse, a little below that. And I look at this season's schedule, and we can try to look at the opponents. We have no idea how good some of these teams are going to be. I mean, Pittsburgh might be awful if they lose Ben Roethlisberger the first game of the season. He goes down for the year, or Cincinnati might bounce back and be really good. The Browns might be way better than people think. Okay, we'll see about that one. But my point is you never really know. So trying to do the win-loss, win-win-loss, just looking at the schedule, I've never put much stock into that. But the first 9 games, or the first 8 games that the Ravens play, 5 of them on the road. And then you do look late in the season, they do play more home games, but, and again, we have no idea what these teams will be like at that point, but at Atlanta, at Kansas City, at the Chargers, in a 4-week period. They have 3 road games there, which is week 13 through 16. This team needs to go into the bye week, in my mind, to put themselves in really good position to not have to win out and have such a small margin for error like they've had the last couple years. They need to be in that 6-3 kind of territory, and certainly no worse than 5-4 going into the bye week. And if they can do that, then I think they're in really good shape. But you do look at these early games, and
well, the concern for me would be Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and how you beat them on the road to begin with, right?
Exactly.
Like that's been hard enough. And if you lose both of them, what that means, no matter what happens against the Bills and the Broncos. I mean, let's say it's 2-2. That's cool. 2-2 is a different kind of 2-2 if you've lost to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. Now, that being said, you don't have to go play them on the road in December, and you'd like to think that you're healthier. Maybe they're healthier too in September. But, I hadn't sort of parsed it together that way, and you sort of gave me the cold morning shower, on Wednesday with no Jimmy Smith for a month, and I started to add up. Well, I'm like, they'll be fine, and then we started to talk about the receivers, and then I started to think about some of these bus rides you and I have had back, or plane rides that I've had back, or walks back to my condo after games where the difference was one play in the air, in the division, that went over our heads, period, whether it was here, there, wherever. That is the story of Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Baltimore in a Bermuda Triangle kind of way all the way around over the last 10 years of Dalton, Roethlisberger, and Flacco, right?
Yeah, and it's not a gloom and doom thing. It's a cautionary tale. It's where the Ravens have been. It's where history has put them over these last 3 of the last 4 years. And I know you can kind of look at each scenario, and you can kind of go through all the anecdotal evidence, all the different games, and you could say, well, Jimmy Smith wouldn't have been covering that specific player on that specific play. Well, that's well and good, but you have to remember, when you're missing a player of that caliber in your secondary, that impacts everything you do from a schematic standpoint, in terms of pressures you bring up front, in terms of coverages you bring in on the backside. I'll even take it a step further. If you're having to play your coverages and your different packages on the back end a little bit differently because you don't have your best corner, that can even impact your run defense, because you might be playing a little more sub than you normally would. That might leave you susceptible to the ground attack. So it's such a trickle-down effect, and it really is a team effort. As much as we're going to look at this, and the spotlight's going to be on Marlon Humphrey, understandably so, as a first-round pick, and probably the guy that you're going to see traveling with A.J. Green in Week 2, and probably traveling with Antonio Brown in Week 4. It's really going to be a collective effort. And here's the other thing to consider. They have a new defensive coordinator, so Wink Martindale, as much as how many times was Dean Pease second-guessed, and some of those times unfairly, and other times it was completely fair to wonder what they were doing, such as leaving Brandon Carr on an island with Antonio Brown late in the fourth quarter last December. He'll have a chance to put his fingerprints on some of these rivalries, some of these big games, and he can really kind of earn his money as the new defensive coordinator if he can fetch some better results on the back end of this defense in however many games Jimmy Smith misses. I mean, certainly we know he's missing the month of September, but he also has to prove that he's going to stay healthy, and he hasn't been able to do that for the last few years. So there are a lot of moving parts here. It's not to say the Ravens are doomed, but I think it is important for this team to get off to a good start for the reasons I spelled out, and you don't want to be dropping 2 road games in the division that early. I mean, you're putting yourself in such a hole. Maybe not with Cincinnati. I'm not really buying the Bengals being all that much better than they've been the last couple of years, which has been pretty underwhelming after a decent run there for Marvin Lewis. But Pittsburgh, and I actually think the Steelers, I think they're going to take a step back this year, or I think they can take a step back this year.
You keep talking snot about the Steelers, dude.
Telling you, it's
August, and we just don't do that around here. What's wrong with you?
I can do that. I don't play. It has no impact on me, or it's not jinxing me, or I'm not jinxing anybody. But my point is, I think Pittsburgh potentially is more vulnerable than they've been the last couple of years. But if you go out there and you lay an egg, and they already have one game in the bag against you, it's putting a heck of a lot of pressure on yourself later in the season. And I mean, sure, I mean most of the time you kind of have an expectation that, well, win your home game, and if you don't win on the road, it's not the end of the world. But well, the Ravens lost at home to Pittsburgh last year, so it's just a cautionary tale. And certainly this team has its question marks. There's a lot of optimism around town, and I think that optimism is fair. I've said it to you on a number of occasions. I'm a little more optimistic about the Ravens than I've been the last few years. But it is cautious optimism, and certainly the developments with Jimmy Smith and the impact it could have on this defense early, even acknowledging that I think they do have better depth than they've had in the past. Again, saying you have better depth is not the same as having your best corner on the field, and to just brush it off and say that the Ravens are going to be fine, I would be disingenuous if I just said that I think that that's going to be the case. I think that they're going to be challenged, and they're going to have they're going to have their hands full trying to contain A.J. Green, trying to contain Antonio Brown without their best corner on the field. And again, it's really going to be a collective effort. And, oh, yeah, let me throw this out there since I haven't really mentioned it in this portion of the discussion. The offense is going to have to score some more points. How about that? As much as we're still looking at this defense as the biggest strength of this football team, Joe Flacco and company, they're going to have to step up a little bit more.
Well, you know the defense isn't going to be as good, period, right? There's no way it's going to be as good over 75 snaps without Jimmy Smith, especially against these offenses that have really exploited this team, even when Jimmy Smith's on the field. So, I feel like the offense will be better, right? Now, if that means 2 field goals a game better, I mean, I guess, right? But it better be better than that. Moving the ball and kicking field goals, okay, that's cool. But they got to score touchdowns, right?
Right. I mean, look, Justin Tucker is the best kicker in the NFL, and he might be the best kicker in NFL history before it's all said and done. That's how highly I think of him. I don't want to see Justin Tucker on the field all the time kicking field goals. That mindset needs to... Not that you completely are reckless, but they need to be thinking bigger than that. And Flacco's talked about that, and Harbaugh and Marty Mornhinweg have talked about that in the offseason, and it needs to come to fruition. That's why you went out and got Michael Crabtree, to be that stud in the red zone that he's been for the last several seasons in Oakland when you look at the number of touchdowns he's caught. That's why you got John Brown to be a big play guy. That's why you got Willie Snead and Hayden Hurst to more effectively work the middle of the field. But it's great to talk about all this, and it's great to see them look good in the spring and during training camp, and the little bit of time we've seen them in the preseason. You know, they put together a couple touchdown drives, but until they kick it off for real, they're still going to be unknown. There's still going to be some doubts, and even with the improvement, I'm still not expecting this offense to be a total juggernaut. But if they can improve that red zone efficiency a little bit more, fewer Justin Tucker field goals and a few more touchdowns, that can go a long way in turning 8-8 or 9-7 into 10-6 and putting yourself firmly in playoff position.
He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. We will be monitoring all things Ravens as they head off to Miami on Saturday night. We've chatted with lots of folks out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. Luke and I have had a whole other segment on Jimmy Smith as well as the aftermath of Monday night and sort of this quick turnaround from Indianapolis to Miami this week. You can also hear Coach Harbaugh, amongst others, out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. If you are interested in joining us for Nashville for my 50th birthday, as well as a nice trip down to see the Ravens and the Titans, and we're also doing the Jack Daniels Distillery. This is the deadline. Coming up this weekend, I've got to have all names in, and so if you're on the fence, still have a great deal on the table, much cheaper than anything else you're going to find out in the marketplace. It's under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live right here at our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.